And welcome back. It's nice to see a nice group gathered with us today for our last session for Water Questions, part of the Shout Learning online conference series. We're talking all about water over the next few conferences, and today we've been asking questions, and the question we posed during this next session is, how does design solve problems of individuals and communities around the world in sustainable ways? And isn't it amazing that there is a job title called Curator of Socially Responsible Design? That job is held by Cynthia Smith at the Cooper-Hewitt, the Smithsonian's National Design Museum. And we also have joining us Carolyn Payson, who's the Director of Education, another really cool job at the Cooper-Hewitt. Carolyn has joined us in the past where we talked about problem solving, and we talked about solving environmental issues with really amazing ways of approaching, using design to approach problems. And so the two have paired up to present to us this great session called Sink or Float, Water and Design Solutions. And I encourage you to use the chat area on the left side of the screen to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Shout Learning, and to visit our partners, Microsoft Partners in Learning, Taking It Global, and the Smithsonian, all of whom are bringing us this conference today. I'll be back at the end with some more resources and some exciting news about the digital badging project for those of you who are new to it, and some additional follow-up resources. But I want to jump right in and learn all about Sink or Float. Over to you guys, and thank you.
Great.
Yeah, we're happy to be here. So today we're going to be talking about how design can solve many problems around the world, from floating houses in New Orleans here in the United States to energy generating machines off the coast of Australia. In Asia and Africa, women and children can often spend 15 to 30 hours a week transporting water, firewood, crops, and grains. Millions of people around the world, especially in rural Africa, live miles from a reliable source of clean water, leaving them vulnerable to cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases. One solution, the Q drum, was designed by two brothers in South Africa. One's an architect and the other one a civil engineer, and they brought their design know-how to solving the problems of transporting clean water. The Q drum is a cylindrical container that can transport water long distances by rolling the water rather than lifting and carrying it. You can really ease the burden of bringing water to those who most need it. It can transport 75 liters of water. That's roughly 1,200 cups of water.
I think this is a really great solution, and as you can see, even a young person can do this, so kids can help out as well. Why do you think this is a good solution to the problem? Does anyone out there like to comment on that?
Let's find out. You can use the chat box on the left. We'd love to hear from you. Why do you think this is a good solution?
I'll start with a couple of ideas. As Cynthia said, it's designed to roll easily. It's shaped like a wheel, something many people call the earliest design. So you can pull it easily. Someone young could do it. Someone who might not be as physically fit as someone can do it as well. It's also made of a very lightweight plastic, which is another great design solution.
And we're seeing a few that match that, that it's affordable and low tech from Abraham and Clea.
Oh, right. Thanks, Abraham and Clea. Cynthia, do you remember how much this cost?
Roughly, I believe $40,
But I
US
bet,
dollars.
so if they produce more of them, that might come down, but it's interesting to see how much these solutions would cost. Can anybody think of other ways that they might carry water for long distances? Anything you might design?
And we'd love to hear your response. What might you design to carry water over a long distance? And by the way, Richard in Wales says it can hold on the prior design, it can hold more water than a bucket on somebody's head and less trips to the water supply. And in response to the current question, John says something that's easily constructed and sent to impoverished countries. Thank you, John.
This is an example of another solution to this problem. One of the cool things about design is that there's often many solutions to the same problem. This container can fit on your hip, or attached to the back of a bike. You can carry it with its handle, or even attach it to a cart and roll it. And then you just need to roll it to tip it and pour it. This is the designer's first sketch about how this would work. One of the things that is really interesting about this is that the designer was inspired by something that you wouldn't think about would be the thing to inspire a water container, which was a whistle. If you look up top and see the blue, doesn't that look like a whistle?
Mm-hmm.
So another important thing to think about is this idea that sometimes designers can be inspired by unexpected things in unexpected ways, and this is certainly an example of that.
Hey, Caroline, it's also amazing that device we were just looking at, it's also quite beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Is that an accident? Did it just happen that in designing it, it wound up looking so beautiful, or is that something that the designer's thinking about from the outset?
Well, I think everyone might be familiar with the term form and function, and I think designers are always grappling with something that works well so that it does its function, but we also want to make sure that, if possible, that something look as attractive as possible. Cynthia, do you know if the designers wanted to make sure this looked as pretty as it's useful?
I'm certain they did. The organization that designed this, IDEO.org, is one of the premier industrial designers, service designers internationally. So I'm sure they're always looking to make sure that the object fits its function and also has an aesthetic appeal to the people who are they're designing it for.
Thank you both.
Well, there's other places around the world that experience long dry seasons. It's that time of year where there's very little water for the farmer, and without water, they cannot grow crops. Yet during the rainy season, there is plenty of water for growing. So many of these farmers living on very small plots of land, often less than a quarter of an acre, can only grow crops when the water is available during certain times of the year. Designers working in Bangladesh and India have found a way to bring the water from the ground and irrigate their fields with locally manufactured bamboo treadle pumps made from locally available low-cost materials. Even the poorest farmer, some of them living on only $1 a day, can afford the pump. It's operated by a natural walking motion on 2 treadles. You can see the young girl walking on the treadle pump there. Now people can grow a variety of fruits and vegetables all year round, not just during the rainy season. Thus, they get more nutritious meals, which means better health. Extra food means extra income, and more money. They can send their kids to school, buy a tin roof for their house, or get proper health care, schooling, and other things that will lead to a better life.
Cynthia, that's a great example of how one object can change someone's life exponentially. One of the things that I think is really important that you mentioned, that it is made of locally available low-cost materials. And it's really important when you think about designing objects that you can use things that are available to you and are local. For some of you who are out there watching, participating, these folks use bamboo, but where are you and what kind of locally sourced materials would you use?
I see some folks in perhaps places like where I live, where there's lots of recycled, lots of plastic bottles and glass jars, and we're also hearing Amanda, who's in New York, says concrete blocks.
Well, there's plenty of those in New York, Amanda.
More on that's great. We're also interesting mulch. Okay, that's a anything else? Other things?
Another interesting idea here is that Sometimes design can have more than one solution to the same problem, as we saw with the water carrier in the previous example. There are many people who've designed different kind of pumps. So for those of you who are still coming up with ideas, you might want to compare them to this design as well. For example, Kickstart in Africa designed something they call the Super Moneymaker pump, which is made from low-cost metal, which is manufactured locally. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It irrigates 2 acres in 8 hours, but by doing that and giving people the opportunity to grow things, it makes money for the families who use it. I think calling something the Super Moneymaker is a great advertising gimmick. What do you think? There's even a smaller version called the smaller portable moneymaker hip pump, which uses the bicycle pump motion to irrigate the fields.
Literally, the farmer, you can see him on the right. He moves back and forth using his hip. And by using his hip, he uses less energy. If he were just to pump it with his arms, he would be exhausted within a few hours. But this allows him to work for a long period of time.
You raise an interesting point by talking about the marketing, having a name like the Super Moneymaker, and we also talked about the beautiful design on the whistle water carrying device. So how important is marketing when introducing a tool? Are we talking about people who are skeptical about a new device? They obviously understand that there's a need. How important is marketing?
Marketing is extremely important. And many of these designers will talk about it because the people aren't familiar with this new technology or these new designs. So a lot of it becomes word of mouth, but the initial uptake of the new design, they have to go out. And I was in Africa recently, and I saw at a fair in one of the local informal settlements, and they had the Super Moneymaker pumps there with big banners and really showing the people locally how they could use it in their urban farms.
So even if it's a silver bullet and a wonderful device, doesn't necessarily mean it instantly has the uptake one would hope. Right. So you have to be thinking about this as you design and bring it.
And I think one of the important things about design is that it focuses on what a user needs. So something could be a really cool idea, but if the user doesn't understand it and know how to use it, it's not a good design. So part of that marketing campaign and part of what the designers did for these is work with these local folks and determine what it was, how these things would work for them.
Paul Pollock, who designed the bamboo treadle pump, sits for hours at a time with the dollar-a-day farmers to find out exactly what their needs are.
That's a really important point for us to know. By the way, Richard Jones is asking, do water pumps take the water from the groundwater supply underground? And if so, is that a sustainable supply of water?
So far, from what I've found in talking with the different designers, there is in the locations where they're working. Well, in Bangladesh, you'll see there are more people per square foot than any place in the world, and they're projected to lose close to 1/5 of their land to rising waters over the next 40 years. In the communities in villages and cities of Bangladesh, there's just too much water. Their rivers and lakes flood, their seas are rising on the coast, and in the mountains, the glaciers are melting. One architect who lives in Bangladesh, Mohammad Rezwan, grew up along the northern rivers, where he's been seeing an increasing amount of flooding over the more recent years. And seeing this, he decided, normally architects design buildings, he didn't want to design buildings that he knew were going to be underwater in his own lifetime. So in response to the rising waters, Mohammed has designed a fleet of over 50 floating community lifeboats. Those include a floating solar-powered medical clinic, a floating school outfitted with computers, floating libraries, and floating community centers connected to the internet. Here they're learning about sustainable farming methods via live video conferencing.
Can any of you imagine the challenges that this designer encountered while he was taking something that's usually on land and building it so that it could stay on the water?
And we'd love to hear from you as you think about it. If you were faced with the same challenge, what kinds of things would you need to overcome and to contemplate in your design? Safety.
Safety. One example is that usually when you build something something where people are going to go to school or live, you work with a builder. But here, he worked with boat builders, traditional boat builders, instead of construction folks. And he used locally available materials like wood and bamboo. And they built 1- and 2-story boats, which enabled them to have classes upstairs for parents in things like farming methods, while the children went to school below, so everybody could go and spend the day.
And that's one of the things that one of our participants mentioned was just the challenge of balancing that many people on a boat, he says, and keeping the boats and the people protected in inclement weather and dealing with outdoor precipitation, says Amanda.
Right, and I'm looking at Ashley and Adam, and both of them are talking about electricity. Amanda's question, I think, is answered by having the covers on the boat. But they're talking about electricity. They did think of that and have solar panels on top of the boat's roofs to get power. Another thing that they did was they retrofitted kerosene lamps so that students and the community members could recharge their cell phones and solar lanterns. Another problem they had to work with was that the old boats had columns which held up the roof. And obviously, if one wants to design this space so that a community can talk to each other and see each other, whether it's a teacher in a classroom or a group of people meeting in a library, they wanted to make sure that space was open. So they did add steel beams.
Yes, across the
interior roof, as Cynthia said, which opened up that space for group activities, because again, to go back to your original question, the function of it had to be as a community space, so they had to provide the room for that to happen.
Even here in the United States, we have water-related disasters. Do you remember that New Orleans and other parts of the Gulf Coast flooded after Hurricane Katrina? In some communities, when there's too much water in a short period of time, the result is a sudden disaster. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina's wind and waves, one wave rose to 28 feet, that's 3 stories high, engulfing communities and water along Mississippi's Gulf Coast. One town, Biloxi, Mississippi, designed and rebuilt their houses on stilts. This one sits 12 feet above sea level, so if the water unexpectedly rises, the family's home will survive. Does this look like anything to you?
When you look at this, what do you see? What does it look like to you? We'll look for your chat in the left-hand side. What do you see?
Well, for me, it reminds me of a big tree house. I roamed through a number of these when I was in Biloxi, and each one is unique to each family. It's where design really can solve problems.
So is this a new trend post-Katrina?
They're working directly with the community to rebuild the entire city. And it's certainly a really good example of how architects, social workers, community organizations and local families can work together to build something that's going to sustain itself over a long period of time.
Ironically, Darren and Richard both say it looks like a boat to them. And we have one person here who says his uncle's house actually looks like this.
That's great.
And Donna agrees, treehouse.
Yep.
Well, another team of architects designed the float house for the devastated Lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. As its name implies, his home is designed to float. Like a car, the house sits on top of a chassis or raised base, which integrates all of the house's electrical and plumbing systems. So if there's ever another disastrous flood, such as they had in New Orleans, Louisiana, the house rises vertically on guideposts up to 12 feet. It floats on the chassis, which acts like a raft. Now, this chassis system is engineered and manufactured. It's prefabricated to support several housing types, which means the base stays the same. So they've designed it so it's completely like a car chassis, only it's a house chassis. And different houses can be built on top of it to meet each family's different needs.
Cynthia, I have a couple of questions about that house. It's one of my favorite designs, but how, most houses are connected to things like electricity and heating and, gas. What happens if enough water comes in?
Well, it does break away, but I think you visited this house, haven't you? Can you tell us more about it?
Oh, sure. I did visit this house and I got to walk inside it. And one of the things that surprised me when I was there is when I first heard the name, the float house, I assumed that if it was flooded, it would float away, which is not the case at all. What happens is that when water comes in and it starts to rise, when it goes to 12 feet, it's designed to automatically disconnect the electricity and the gas lines, but the levers stay in place so that although it rises, it doesn't float away. So we're not going to face a problem. We wouldn't be facing a problem where these houses, if a community was full of them, these houses would be bumping into each other.
That's
so
amazing.
It stays tethered to where it is. It's a really cool solution to this problem.
Any idea? We have a question here about the purpose of the design of the roof and how it sort of looks like it's rotated.
My guess would be, and I'm not an expert on this, would be to take advantage of the way the sun is. This part of New Orleans. It can be really hot, but it's also a place where people in many communities there really enjoy being sociable and sitting outside. So I think that the way the roof goes, it allows for people to sort of sit outside their house and be social and to move around based on where the sun is.
You can't, yeah, I would agree with you. And you can see how the right below the roof, there's allows light to come in, even though it protects it from the sun and the rain. There's a lot of rain down there, and it overhangs over the porch. But you can't really tell from this angle, but this is based on this housing type that they find throughout New Orleans called the shotgun house, which is kind of a small, narrow house. They were designed to be built on small plots of land. And so the architects, not straying too far from what originally was there in the Ninth Ward, have actually looked at the history and incorporated those types of design into this new house. Caroline, do you know how many more they plan to build down in
Well, we
in New Orleans?
have been lucky enough to partner with Make It Right, which is the organization in the Ninth Ward that makes these houses. And there are many different kinds of houses, and the people moving back to these communities are able to choose which style they like. I know at this point, Make It Right has built over 90 houses and they're, I think, on board to finish about 30 more in the next couple of months. So they've really made huge inroads in this community. And although although I don't know how many ordered this exact house, but I think one of the important points with those houses is that although they're very modern and they look different from the houses that were there before, as Cynthia said, they're still based on the idea of the way the people there want to live and how they like to interact with their communities, so that although it doesn't look like an old shotgun house, it's still the same length and the same width, and it still has that idea of one room leading into the next with some social space outside. So sometimes something can look very different from its original version, but it still meets the user's needs because it captures the spirit of how they want something to be, or how they want it to be. So this is, to me, is a great example of that. So these are two examples of what people have done when there's been a quick influx of water causing disaster. I don't know if anybody out there can imagine what they might design if they were faced with the same problem. We've had a floating house and just putting something on stilts.
What would you design? Do you have an image in your mind that you can share with us? Even some rough thoughts, doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. We'd love to hear from you. By the way, on the last house we were looking at, Jean was curious about whether high winds are a problem and if so much glass on a structure like that is a concern. So while you think about your designs, obviously it's not something that immediately can pop into your head.
Right now, it
sometimes.
takes a while.
Yeah. So do share.
But I think, just to answer Jean's question, I think that those are sliding screens too that might cover the glass. Why don't we go back and take a look? That these right here are sliding screen doors
To protect the
that would
glass.
protect the glass.
Oh, that's fascinating. Look at that. Great.
And again, they are also beautiful. So they would both serve a protective function and add to the way it looks. We'll give you guys some time to think about what you might design. Oh.
Kristen says, the designs are wonderful, but I find myself more interested in what to do to retrofit existing structures to protect against changing conditions. And that certainly is a very valid way of designing your way out of a problem, not necessarily coming up with something wholesale completely new.
Right. And I think that depends on the circumstance. This area in New Orleans was devastated in Katrina. So they had the opportunity to rethink how they might build those houses. And every purpose, I mean, we just saw the outside of a house, but every part of that design of the house has been, the idea of a sudden flood has been built into that. So they're a certain level from the ground. They have the screens in for the protection against the wind. And while that's the only floating house, they're all designed in some way to sustain a severe weather condition. So that's but again, they unfortunately were devastated, so they needed to start over. There are many other designers who are working on ways of protecting things that have survived floods in the past but may not in the future. So certainly retrofitting is a really important idea.
We had one suggestion about perhaps making a home that operates like a hovercraft. Also known as a hover house, says Richard. And we have a comment here. Let's see. John says, "I've seen designs for New Orleans to be put completely on the water on floating octagons, which in the case of a storm would detach from each other and literally sail away under powered motors. For individual houses, it would be extremely difficult and take a dedicated team of engineers to formulate a solution."
Wow, there's your hovercraft, I think.
There it is, the two ideas together. That's right.
So if we had a hovercraft, would you need a jetpack to get to it?
That's a good question. Great. Well, keep your ideas coming. Some of you may still be sharing them and typing them in. We will entertain them as they arrive.
So sometimes water isn't the problem, it's the solution. This image from space, it's taken at night, shows the amount of light and energy being used around the world. You can see Africa on the lower right, America on the upper left, very bright, using a lot of energy, and Europe using quite a bit of energy. Today, as more people around the world, there's 7 billion of us and counting, we need more and more new forms of energy to power our growing planet. Ocean waves are abundant and untapped sources of renewable energy. The BioWave ocean wave energy system is a nature-inspired design, what we call biomimicry. A lot of design is informed by nature. By mimicking the swaying motions of sea plants, this underwater machine harnesses the power of ocean waves, transforming it into clean energy. So currently, from what I understand, there are plans to mount these energy converters on the seabed off the coast of Australia to generate energy for Australia's coastal cities.
Can we see that again? That was pretty amazing. I'm going to bring up that animation one more time. It's delightfully hypnotic and powerful to imagine harnessing that incredible force of the water.
So it looks like a wave, or it's to generate. And if you look along the seabed bottom, you'll see it again when it comes back up. There are cables that run to the edge.
I love this, and it lays flat when the system is experiencing when there are extreme conditions. Amazing.
Cynthia, how big are those? It's hard to judge when you're looking at something at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, they're usually in. You'd have a scale figure there. There's no scale person at the bottom there for us
No
to
volunteers?
tell.
Great.
Those are really cool. And I'm imagining that there are other ways that water, or the power of water, can be harnessed to also solve problems. And it seems like in the field of energy, that might be a place where water can be particularly useful. Because although, one of the things I like about that previous design is that it mimics the waves, right? One of the things that water can do is make waves. Another thing that water can do is float things. So although one doesn't see that as a huge source of power, it is really interesting to think about if you can take these surfaces for floating, how you might use that. This is one of my favorite designs from an exhibition we had recently. These are called solar lilies that were designed by some people in Scotland. And they're motorized floats made of steel and rubber that are covered with solar panels. So they're able to move down bodies of water, tracking the sun and converting that to solar energy. I think they're incredibly beautiful. They do kind of look like water lilies, yet they're able to generate a lot of power.
Remind us again where these are?
These have been designed, and they're in the prototype stage right now. And prototype is a model of something that might work by Scottish designers. So you might also wonder how these might work in a place that doesn't have a lot of sun. But they're being designed and prototyped right now in Scotland.
Amazing.
I'm wondering if anybody out there, oh, we do have some questions too, but why don't we start people thinking about other ways that people might use water to solve problems? Oops.
We had one suggestion about using rain harvesting that could also turn small turbines using gravity.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea.
There is a lot of force in falling water. There was a question earlier about whether the biowave could disturb any ocean fauna or flora. Are you aware of any examples where something that was designed with the best intentions to create a sustainable, eco-friendly approach to solving a problem had consequences that were unanticipated or unexpected in a negative way?
Well, I know with the BioWave, the designers worked diligently in their designs to ensure that it didn't have an impact on the fauna and flora. So that was part of their design uh,
Approach to begin with was
yeah.
to
So
ensure
so
that.
they were very aware of that. So they again, that's also a concept, a prototype. It has not been actually executed yet, but I understand there are plans to build it off of the coast of Australia.
And building off of the idea of rain harvesting and turning turbines, Adam says, and maybe the impact of the rain too. Is he citing perhaps are there pressure-sensitive platforms being tested in London that store the impact of the energy of the people walking across them? These are very creative ways to look at the energy that's exerted all around us and try to find ways to reuse it. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
If anybody has any other questions, or if anybody wants to know more about this design or lots of other information about design and designers, they should go to the Cooper-Hewitt.org website.
Great. I know there's some more comments coming in here. I would like to put Clea's rain harvester turbines in my house as downspouts. So I'm glad to see some collaboration and some willingness to do some testing. Also, we had a note here. I believe that there's a snake-like contraption that floats on top of water. It's segmented and it produces energy with its wave motion, and it's in a prototype form.
That's very interesting.
Hmm.
Again, looking at nature, biomimicry to come up with design solutions.
In terms of biomimicry and what you're seeing at the Cooper-Hewitt, is this an area completely, is it an area into itself in terms of curation and keeping your eyes out for things? It really seems to be becoming a very important trend. Have you done or have you contemplated exhibits purely on biomimicry?
It's becoming more and more part of what the current design field is looking at, but it's been around for a very long time. One of my favorite examples is, Velcro, how Velcro was designed. A gentleman who came up with the idea, the concept for it, his dog was running through a field and got burrs on his hair of the coat of his hair, and he came back and pulled it apart and took a closer look at burrs and how they have these little tiny prongs on the end of them, barbs, and came up with the whole idea of kind of that two-sided adhesive. And so that was probably in the 80s that they came up with Velcro. So it's been going on for decades, and then you could probably look back in time. So it'd be very interesting to see what's currently happening with design and technology, looking at nature, and then going back through time.
I remember we had a great design in our triennial a couple of years ago of something that searched for landmines at the bottom of the ocean, and it acted like and looked a lot like a mechanical lobster. With its tentacles, and it kind of crawled along the bottom and was able to sort of detect, well, I guess it's not a landmine if it's under the water, but it was looking for explosives. And it, the designers had taken their inspiration in the way a lobster moves.
I imagine too that the more advanced our own scientific research goes into biology and biochemistry, the more we know, the more we can begin to mimic. Sometimes the mimicry happens at a level that we don't necessarily know until we can see that small and so it's amazing. I know that Velcro story. I think that Velcro went right onto my sneakers right about that same time. Jaya, who's with us from Maryland today, says that biomimicry and biomimetics is a cross-cutting discipline. I'm a scientist and I've been involved in this area of research, and I would turn to Jaya and to others here, in particular Jaya, but everyone. We'd love to know from you, do you have a favorite example of design using biomimicry, just either in terms of its elegance or the problem it solves, or just you enjoy the ingenious nature of the design? Because sometimes the answers to the problems we're looking for are right in front of us. They're already solving some other problem. Do you have a favorite biomimicry example, Carolyn?
Well, I liked the lobster.
There was one that you shared during the last session. I'm going to encourage everybody to go check out. It was the solar ivy.
I love that one.
And for those who haven't seen it, we'll find a link and put it into the chat box in a few moments. And this was an example of small solar panels that hung on the outside of a home, and
Right.
actually had two forms of energy generation. One, they were solar panels, and the second one is the wind motion captured kinetic energy as these
Right.
little tiny leaf-like panels hung and flowed in the
Right.
breeze.
There's also a wonderful prototype of a street light that is designed to be put in the tops of trees, and it looks like leaves during the day, and then at night, after they collect solar energy, they're able to light the streets.
Oh, that's amazing. We have some responses coming in. Jaya says, I have many examples. Solar powered cell is one. And by the way, there is a question about whether, yes, so the recording of today's presentation, I imagine there's a lot of imagery and things you want to go back and revisit and share with others. So this, of course, will all be available together with the recording. And like yesterday's recordings, they'll all be posted really within an hour or two after our events end here. So you can look for those back on the site later. And thank you, Jaya, for submitting a number of other descriptions of some things like breathable fabrics. There's one called Stomatex that she's telling us about. Wonderful. So we do have a few minutes, and we'd love to take any additional questions or things you would like to share with us about design. Any additional final thoughts or encouragement for our learners today is something that people might not necessarily think about when it comes to using design to solving problems.
I think if you're interested in this area of design, it's a growing area of design to work with people around the world, especially those living in places like Bangladesh or some of the devastated parts of New Orleans, is to work directly with people. Often you get your best ideas from your clients, from the end users, to work in co-creation directly with the people who are in most need.
And I would add to that is that thinking like a designer is a skill set that I think can be applied to solving all sorts of problems. And some of the things that I look at when I see some of these solutions is that some of these problems are very, very complex, yet often, say in the case of the Q drum, a very simple design can solve a very complex problem. And sometimes that simple design can be built on in more complex ways, like the solar lily pads, right? A lily pad is a very simple solution, but to add the technology and create that solves a much bigger problem. I think it's also really important for people to think about how all sorts of solutions can be applied to the same problem. That there isn't just one way of solving a problem, that there are many ways to solve a problem, and that should be, not only does that kind of make the problem solving more interesting, but that should inspire more people to try to think like designers and solve some of these problems.
That's the amazing thing too, is no matter how long we've been using design or trying to solve things, there's always new inventions. There's always a better way. And I think, and how many times do people say there's got to be a better way? And
Uh-huh.
when they have that thought, what's the first thing they should do?
Well, it's funny, we often tell young people who are thinking about design that the first thing they need to do is find out what bugs them and try to solve it. And I would say that the first thing to do is to try to define that problem and think about it beyond just yourself. If it bugs you, does it bug other people? Why does it bug you? And then brainstorm as many solutions as possible. And once you've done that, you might want to build yourself, as some of these things are, as a prototype, a working model. We have some videos on our website that actually just have that process so that people can go to Cooper-Hewitt.org and see some challenges. And we have something called the Brown Bag Challenge that gives you shows how different people have solved some of the same problems. So they might want to go look at that. But I would also say that idea of brainstorming, coming up with a prototype, and then when you hear about how that prototype can be improved from other users and say the other kids in your class or other people that are interested in this, to then try to make it better based on that feedback.
That's great. That's a great starting point. And remember, Cooper-Hewitt.org. We'll go ahead and put that link back up as well. There's some amazing resources on the Cooper-Hewitt website, and you should check them out. Although not water related, and we didn't ask it to be, Adam suggests that he would pay good money to the person who can stop his earbud cables from getting tangled in his pocket.
We'll work on that, Adam.
So I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today. A really amazing walk through some powerful, in some cases very simple ways of addressing some really real world problems. By the way, I just want to say here, Jury, who's joining us from California, says, I studied industrial design back in the 1960s, conspicuous consumption, and if I were practicing today, I would look at recycling materials and recycled materials. There's an awful lot that's waiting for us to do with that. So a few quick things. First of all, there is an evaluation at the top left, and this is for the conference as a whole. We have a number of people who have been with us for the entire conference, and we hope you'll click on that link. Even if you've just been with us today, there's a way to select each session that you'd like to give us some feedback on. It's really important to us because, like the design process, the only way to make things better is to get feedback and to ask the people who have been part of the experience, and that's what we're asking you to do today. So please take a moment and click on that evaluation link. I'd also like to point out and remind you that we have upcoming conferences, and if you go to shoutlearning.org, you'll see a link to the schedule for the upcoming events. In fact, our next sessions will take place at the end of March, and we'll be coming to you live from Panama. And we'll be hearing about some very unique perspectives on water-related issues related to water quantity coming to us from Panama. So please do check that out. And let's see here. I am also going to go ahead and introduce, real briefly before we close up for the day, Ashley Naranjo, who's going to review a couple of quick things you might want to think about as you continue your shout exploration.
Can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Ashley.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
I called her from across the room at the last moment. She got over here seamlessly.
Well, I just wanted to remind everybody that you can obviously follow us on Facebook and Twitter, like Jonathan had mentioned before. And through those social media outlets, you can find out about new activities to try out in the classroom, get resources from both Smithsonian and external sources. And then also get reminders about these conferences, as well as the teacher preview sessions that both Josh from CERC, which is the Environmental Research Center, and myself, we have online. And the next one that's coming up is March 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be looking at the American Indian website that addresses environmental challenges. Another great resource is the Microsoft Partners in Learning network that I think we had on the screen just a second ago. And that's a great way to network with other educators. You can also highlight yourself as a Shout educator. And then finally, I just wanted to mention something new this year, which is the virtual badging program. And with that, after you've learned about all these great topics that have to do with water, we have created learning quests. And teachers, if you'd like, you can sign up on this online website that's posted right now. And it's a great way for your students to interact and apply some of the knowledge that they've learned here in these sessions. There's a lot of critical thinking, creativity, and it's interdisciplinary amongst all subject areas. So there'll be a little bit of everything for all the students.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here with us. Ashley, thank you so much. Don't forget, we have on the shoutlearning.org website, you'll be able to see the upcoming sessions that are coming up on March 26th and 27th. So we'll look forward to seeing you all then on behalf of our partners, Microsoft Partners in Learning, taking it global, and joining you live here from the Smithsonian. We'll see you all soon. Please stay in touch. We'll see you on Facebook and Twitter and places in between. Thank you.